Hello there everybody, Martin here from Affinity for Commander. Today we have two new players to the channel showing off their mad skills, so without further ado, let's take a look at those opening hands. I am playing my Oloro Ageless Ascetic Life Gain deck, and keep a starting hand consisting of Azorius Signet, Darksteel Ingot, Campbell Console of Allocation, Mortify, Ristic Study, Opal Palace and an Island.
I am playing my Laelia the Blade Reforged Ixhel tribal deck, keeping a starting hand of Wanderlust, Tormenting Voiced, Hazard's Monument, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, and 2 mountains.
Toni is playing his Ixhel Scion of Atraxa Poison Counters deck, and keeps a hand containing Skrelv Defectomite, Diabolic Tutor, Commander's Sphere, Phyresis Outbreak, Necroblossom Snarl, Sungrass Prairie, and Temple of Malady.
And finally, Ben is using his Gilanra Caller of Wirewood, and Brinelin the Moonkraken Big Mana Value deck, using Karuga the Macro Sage as his companion. He keeps a starting hand made up of Beastmaster's Ascension, Roiling Regrowth, Avenger's Zendikar, Aminatu's Augury, Myriad Landscape, Vine Glimmer Snarl, and an Island. Toni wins the die roll and starts things off by playing Temple of Malady. He scries 1, keeping the top card of his library where it is, and passes to Martin.
I gain 2 life in my upkeep thanks to Oloro's ability, and play an island before passing.
I play Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, and end my turn.
In his turn, Ben plays Myriad Landscape and passes to Toni.
Toni plays Sungrass Prairie, and passes the turn.
I gain 2 life, play a Plains, and cast Azorius Signet. With nothing more to do, I end my turn.
I start my turn by playing a mountain, and then cast Tormenting Voice. I discard a card, draw 2 new ones, and pass to Ben.
Ben plays Vine Glimmer Snarl, revealing an island to have the land enter untapped. With 2 mana open, he passes the turn.
Toni begins his turn by playing a forest, and taps out to cast Commander's Sphere. Not yet finished, he uses his artifact to cast Skrelv Defectomite, and ends his turn.
I gain 2 life in my upkeep and cast Ristic Study.
Boo!
You'll want to talk. Next I play Terramorphic Expanse as my land for turn, which I immediately sacrifice, searching my library for a swamp. I put the land into play tapped, and pass to Alex.
I play another mountain, and cast my commander, Laelia the Blade Reforged. Martin draws a card given that I am unable to pay the Ristic Study tax, and I move to combat. Here I attack Martin with my Spirit, exile the top card of my library with her attack trigger. I put a +1/+1 counter on Laelia, and unable to block, Martin takes 3 damage. Happy with my play, I pass the turn.
Ben starts his turn by playing an island and casts one of his commanders, Gilanra Caller of Wirewood. I draw a card given that he is unable to pay the 1, and Ben ends his turn.
In his turn, Toni plays Necroblossom Snarl, having it enter tapped, and casts Arcane Signet. Martin draws a card, and Toni taps his remaining mana to cast Phyresis Outbreak. Martin draws once more, and Ben, Martin and I each get our first poison counters of the game. Each of our creatures gets -1/-1, killing nothing, and Toni passes to Martin.
I gain 2, play a swamp, and cast Campbell Console of Allocation.
Boo!
Will you be quiet? Next I cast Blind Obedience, further annoying the rest of the table with my controlling shenanigans.
Boo, you suck!
And pass.
I begin my turn by playing a mountain, and then move to combat. Here I once again attack Martin with Laelia, and exile top card of my library as I do so. I put a +1/+1 counter on my commander, and Martin declares no blocks, taking 4 damage. In my post-combat main phase, I cast the Light Up the Stage that I just exiled for its spectacle cost, triggering Campbell's ability. I lose 2 life, and Martin gains 2 life in this way, and I exile 2 more cards from the top of my library. I pay an additional mana to prevent Martin from drawing a card with Ristic Study.
Rude.
And put another counter on Laelia before casting the Soul Ring that I exiled with my sorcery. I once again lose 2 life, and Martin gains 2 life, and I pay the 1 to Ristic Study to prevent Martin from drawing.
Double rude.
Soul Ring then enters tapped thanks to Blind Obedience, and I end my turn.
Ben plays Tranquil Thicket and taps all of his lands to cast Beast Within. He targets my Blind Obedience with a spell, losing 2 life and gaining me 2 life thanks to Campbell, and pays 1 more mana to stop me from drawing a card of Rhystic Study. The removal spell then resolves, destroying my enchantment and replacing it with a 3/3 Beast token.
A fair trade if I do say so.
Completely tapped out, Ben passes to Toni.
In his turn, Toni floats a black mana with Commander Sphere and sacrifices it to draw a card. Next, he casts Plague Stinger, paying for the Rhystic Study tax, and uses his remaining mana to cast Kodama's Reach. Campbell triggers once more, draining Toni for 2, and Martin draws a card thanks to his study. Toni then searches his library for a swamp and a plains, putting the former into his hand and the latter into play tapped. With nothing more to do, Toni passes the turn.
In my turn, I gain 2 life and play Opal Palace as my land. Next, I cast Orzhov Signet, closely followed by Vizkopa Guildmage, and move to combat. Here I attack Alex of Campbell and my beast, dealing him 5 damage, and end my turn.
I start my turn by playing a mountain, and then move to combat. Here I once again attack Martin with Laelia, exile a top card of my library, and putting a +1/+1 counter on her. Martin declares no blocks, taking 5 damage, and I proceed to my second main phase. Here I cast Hazoret's Monument, Martin gains 2, I lose 2 life, and I pay mana to the Rhystic Study, preventing Martin from drawing again.
Triple rude.
I then cast the Professional Facebreaker that I exiled when my commander attacked, letting Martin draw from his study. I discard and draw thanks to my monument, and with nothing more to do, I pass to Ben.
Ben begins his turn by casting Kodama's Reach, letting me draw a card from my Rhystic Study. Ben loses 2 life, I gain 2 life, and Ben searches his library for a forest and an island. He puts the former into play tapped, plays the latter as his land for turn, and casts Roiling Regrowth. Ben sacrifices a forest to the spell and loses 2 life, I gain 2 life and draw a card, and Ben puts 2 forests into play from his library. Happy with the amount of ramping he's achieved this turn, Ben passes.
In his turn, Toni casts Mortify, targeting Campbell. He loses 2 life, Martin gains 2 life, and Martin draws a card from his enchantment when Toni refuses to pay the 1. The console of allocation is then destroyed, and Toni casts his commander, Ixhel, Scion of Atraxa. Martin draws a card, and Toni moves to combat, where he attacks Martin with his Plague Stinger. Unable to block, Martin takes another point of Infect, and Toni declares his intent to move to his end step. Martin responds to this by casting a Mortify of his own, targeting Ixhel, and Toni responds to this by paying 2 life to activate Skrilov's ability.
Pesky little mite.
Toni gives his commander protection from white, causing Mortify to fizzle without a legal target, and proceeds to his end step. Here he exiles the top card of Martin's library with Ixhel's ability, and ends his turn.
I gain 2 life, play Command Tower, and cast Crested Sunmare. Next, I cast Vindicate, destroying Ixhel in this way, and move to combat. Here I attack Toni with my Guild Mage, dealing him 2 damage, and move to my end step. I create a 5/5 horse token due to my Sunmare's ability, discard down to 7, and pass to Alex.
In my turn, I move straight to combat, attacking Ben with my Facebreaker and Toni with my commander. I exile top card of my library with Laelia's ability, putting a +1/+1 counter on her as I do so, and damage then occurs. Ben takes 2, Toni takes 6, and I create 2 treasure tokens thanks to my Facebreaker's ability. In my post-combat main phase, I play the mountain that I exile with Laelia's ability, and cast Mana Geyser. I pay 1 extra to prevent Martin from drawing a card, and add 19 red mana to my mana pool.
Jeez, that card is busted in, Commander.
Next, I cast an overloaded Vandal Blast, paying the 1 to the Rhystic Study trigger. Each artifact I don't control is destroyed, and I continue my turn by casting a Dire Fleet Daredevil. I once again pay for Rhystic Study, and cast the Beast Within in Ben's graveyard, targeting the aforementioned study. I pay the Rhystic Study tax, denying Martin 1 final piece of card draw, and the enchantment is finally destroyed and replaced with a 3/3 beast. Still not finished, I cast Endless Atlas, closely followed by Swiftfoot Boots. I equip the boots to my commander, and use the last bit of my floating mana to draw a card with Endless Atlas. Still not done, I use my remaining untapped lands and both of my treasures to cast Outpost Siege, naming Khans. Rather pleased with what I've managed to accomplish, I pass the turn.
Ben plays a forest and casts his other commander, Brinelin the Moonkraken. He draws a card from Gilanra's ability and returns Crestus Sunmare to my hand with the Kraken's ETB. With only one colourless mana remaining, Ben ends his turn.
Toni starts his turn by playing a Plains, and casts Geth's Summons. He returns the Campbell in Martin's graveyard and the Skrelev in his own graveyard to the battlefield in this way, and casts the Dawn of Hope that he stole from Martin last turn.
Thief!
Not wishing to attack, Toni passes the turn.
I gain 2 life and play a Plains. Next I cast a Johnny, Strength of the Pride, losing 2 life to Campbell, and Toni gains 2 life.
Oh, how the turntables turn.
Luckily for me though, I still have just enough life to activate my Planeswalker's Zero ability, exiling the Leonin alongside each of my opponent's creatures and artifacts. This makes the rest of the table very sad, and I cast Darksteel Ingot before moving to combat. Here I attack Toni with this COPPA Guildmage and my horse, and Alex with my beast, dealing them 7 and 6 damage respectively. Feeling a lot better about my position in the game, I pass the turn.
I begin my turn by exiling a mountain with Outpost Siege, which I then play. This triggers Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, and I deal 3 damage to the COPPA Guildmage, destroying it before Martin gets a chance to use its life-draining ability. Next, I recast my commander and move to combat. Here, I attack Martin with Laelia, exiling a card with her ability and putting a +1/+1 counter on her. Unable to block, Martin takes 3 damage, and I proceed to my post-combat main phase. Here I use my remaining mana to cast Blade of Selves and end my turn.
In his turn, Ben plays a forest and casts Commander's Sphere. Not yet finished, he casts Beastmaster's Ascension and then casts Incubation. Ben looks at the top 5 cards of his library, putting Avenger of Zendikar into his hand from among them, and uses the last of his mana to activate his Myriad Landscapes ability. He sacrifices the land, putting 2 islands onto the battlefield tapped, and passes to Toni.
Toni recasts Ixhel and moves to his end step. Here he once again exiles top card from Martin's library and passes.
In my turn, I gain 2 life and play Esper Panorama. Next I cast Darksteel Mutation, turning Alex's commander into a 0/1 indestructible insect before he can kill me with commander damage, and recast Sunmare before moving to combat. Here I attack Ben with both of my beasts, dealing him 6 damage, and proceed to my end step. I create another horse token, and end my turn.
I exile a card with Outpost Siege and play a mountain. Valakut triggers and I deal 3 damage to one of Martin's beasts before casting the Commander Sphere that I exiled with my enchantment. Not yet finished, I equip Blade of Selves to my insectified Laelia and move to combat. Here I attack Martin with my bug, creating 2 token copies of them thanks to Blade of Selves. The legend rule forces me to sacrifice 2 of them, and I choose to get rid of 1 token and the original Laelia in this way.
Well, that's certainly a creative way of getting around Darksteel Mutation.
The remaining Laelia continues its assault against Ben, who takes 0 damage in this way, and I exile the little beetle before passing to Ben.
Ben starts his turn by playing Thriving Isle, choosing for it to tap for green as its secondary colour. Next he spends a whopping 10 mana to recast Brinelin, bouncing one of my horse tokens as the Kraken enters the battlefield. With almost all of his resources spent on that one spell, Ben passes the turn.
In his turn, Toni plays the Dismal Backwater that he stole from Martin, gaining a life as it enters the battlefield. Next he casts Utter End, exiling Martin's Sunmare, and moves to combat. Here he attacks Martin with Ixhel, dealing him 2 damage and giving him 2 poison counters.
Raise your hand if you've ever been personally victimised by Toni.
Toni then moves to his end step, and Martin responds to this by sacrificing his Panorama, searching his library for an island. He puts the land into play tapped, and Toni exiles the top card of Martin's library before passing.
I gain 2 life in my upkeep and cast my commander, Oloro, Ageless Aesthetic. I then play Seraph Sanctuary, gaining another life, and activate Oloro's ability. I draw a card, each of my opponents lose a life, and I attempt to quell the hate I'm receiving by casting Propaganda. Moving to combat, I attack Alex with my beast and Toni with my pony. Alex takes 3, Toni takes 5, and I end my turn.
I begin my turn by exiling Ignite the Future with Outpost Siege, which I immediately cast. I exile 3 more cards on top of my library, play the Thought Vessel that was among them, and play War Room as my land for turn. Not yet finished, I tap all of my remaining mana producers to cast Urabrask Heretic Praetor, and pass to Ben.
Ben begins his turn by exiling the top card of his library instead of drawing due to Urabrask's ability, and plays the command tower that was just exiled. Next he casts Amanatu's Augury, returning Propaganda to my hand with his Kraken's triggered ability. Ben exiles the top 8 cards of his library and puts the Yapamaya Coast from among them onto the battlefield. Not yet finished, he casts Migration Path, putting a forest and an island into play in this way.
Will he ever stop ramping?
Next Ben casts Llanowar Visionary, drawing a card, closely followed by Dig Through Time. He bounces Oloro to my hand with Brinelin's ability, puts 2 of the top 7 cards of his library into his hand, and passes.
Toni exiles the top card of his library, plays a Swamp, and casts the Soul Warden that he took from Martin.
Will people please just leave my cards alone for 5 minutes?
Next, Toni casts the Phyrexian Sworn Lord that he exiled at the beginning of his turn, gains a life from his Warden, and draws a card with Dawn of Hope.
Synergy.
Moving to combat, Toni decides to take a break from wailing on Martin, instead attacking me with his commander. I take 2 damage, gain 2 poison counters, and Toni moves to his end step. Here he exiles the top cards of both Martin and my libraries, and ends his turn.
In my turn, I exile a top card of my library, gain 2 life, and recast Oloro, Ageless Aesthetic. Toni gains a life, and I play Radiant Fountain, gaining 2 more life. I pay 1 mana to activate my commander's ability, drawing a card, and making each of my opponents lose a life. Not quite finished, I recast Propaganda, and then move to combat. Here I attack Alex with my horse, dealing him 5 damage, and pass the turn to him.
I start my turn by exiling the top 2 cards of my library thanks to the combined effects of Outpost Siege and Urabrask, and then cast a card that Martin really hates, Reckless Endeavour.
D12s are for barbarians, not magic players.
I roll 2 dice, getting a 7 and a 4, and choose to create 7 treasure and deal 4 damage to each creature. This destroys everything, except for Ixhel, Oloro, and Brinelin. And I then cast Godo Bandit Warlord. I search my library for Helm of the Host with Godo's ETV before putting the artifact onto the battlefield, much to everyone else's despair.
It's an older combo, sir, but it checks out.
Next, I use my remaining treasures to attach my helm to Godo, and Ben responds to this by channeling Colossal Sky Turtle. He returns my Helmet Tutoring Warlord to my hand, and with no mana remaining, I sadly pass the turn.
Ben moves straight to combat, attacking Alex with his commander. Unable to block, Alex takes 6 damage, and Ben puts a quest counter on Beastmaster's Ascension. In his post-combat main phase, Ben casts Avenger of Zendikar, creating 15 0/1 plant tokens and bouncing Ixhel to Toni's hand with Brinelin's ability.
Sweet! That's a lot of trees.
Not yet finished, Ben casts Nexus of Fate, this time bouncing Oloro with his Kraken's trigger. He shuffles a spell into his library and moves to his extra turn. Here Ben casts Prime Speaker Zagana, returning Propaganda to my hand, and puts 6 +1/+1 counters on the former Guildmaster. He draws 7 cards, plays Temple of the False God, and puts a +1/+1 counter on each of his plants before moving to combat. Here Ben attacks the rest of us with all of his creatures that are able to do so, which all get +5/+5 thanks to the Beastmaster's Ascension. This deals Alex, Toni and I lethal damage in one glorious swing, leaving Ben as the victor. Well, that is it for another game. I hope that you enjoyed watching Ben claim victory with his rather unique deck. I'd like to give a huge thank you to each and every one of our incredible patrons, without whom we'd be unable to continue making content such as this. Also, be sure to check out our affiliate links in the video description. It won't cost you anything extra to make your purchases through these, but it really helps out the channel. And finally, don't forget that you can help to support the channel in 4 quick and easy ways: liking this video, subscribing, hitting that bell icon, and leaving us a comment. I read every one. Well, that's it for now guys, we'll see you next time. Stay awesome!